Clara Whitmore did not knock. She pressed both hands flat against the iron gate of Hawthorne Estate, felt the rust bite into her palms, and pushed until the hinges screamed. 3 men turned to stare. One reached for her arm. She stepped past him like he was made of smoke. Her father had worked this land for 19 years. He had written letters every season for 4 of them. Every single one had been buried in a filing cabinet and never answered. She was done waiting for permission. If this story moves something in you, subscribe to this channel, follow every part to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The first man who tried to stop her was a young laborer with sun-cracked hands and a nervous look that said he had learned the hard way what happened when he failed to follow instructions. "Ma'am." He stepped directly into her path, hat half raised in a gesture that was equal parts courtesy and warning. "Ma'am, this is private property. Mr. Carlyle's orders no one comes through this gate without." "Move," Clara said. He blinked. I said move. She kept walking. "Unless Mr. Carlyle also gave you orders to physically restrain a woman carrying a notebook, I suggest you step aside and let me through." He did not move fast enough. She walked around him. The second man, older, heavier, with the particular bearing of someone who had been given just enough authority to feel important, planted himself directly in front of her and crossed his arms. "Miss, I ain't gonna ask politely. You turn yourself around right now, or I fetch Mr. Carlyle and you explain yourself to him." Clara stopped. She looked at the man. Then she looked past him, toward the long drive that ran through the oak trees toward the main house. Then she looked back at him. "Fetch Mr. Carlyle," she said. "Please," the man's certainty flickered. "I mean it," she said. "Go get him. Tell him Clara Whitmore is here, and she has questions about the survey crew he sent to the valley 2 weeks ago, and she intends to stand here until someone with actual authority answers them." A long pause. The man looked at the young laborer. The young laborer looked at the ground. Clara waited. "You wait here," the older man finally said. "Of course," Clara said, and walked straight past him toward the valley. She had been coming to this land since she was old enough to follow her father through the backfields without losing her footing in the tall grass. George Whitmore had not been a man of many words. He had been a man of careful hands that could identify a plant by the texture of its stem, that could tell the age of an oak by the way the bark split, that could coax water from dry ground by reading the slope of the earth the way other men read a page. He had taught Clara everything he knew, not because he had planned to. Not because he had sat her down and said, "Daughter, I am going to teach you the things that matter." He had taught her the way a man teaches when he loves something deeply and cannot contain that love to himself, by doing it in front of her, by answering every question she ever asked, by handing her the notebook when her hands were finally steady enough to hold the pencil without smudging. He had died in the 3rd winter after Nathaniel Hawthorne left for the war. Clara had been 21. She had sat at his bedside for 11 days and watched the sickness take him piece by piece, and the last thing he had said to her, the last real sentence, before the fever made language impossible, was, "Don't let them fill in the valley." She had not known what he meant. Not fully. She knew now. The valley was a natural depression behind the old orchard, past the collapsed stone wall that marked the edge of the maintained grounds. Most people on the estate had never been this far back. The land here was not productive in any way Carlyle would recognize. It did not grow crops. It could not be grazed without damage. It generated no income and required no maintenance. What it did was exist. The spring ran clear along the eastern edge, no louder than breathing. The grasses grew layered and undisturbed. And the plants that grew here and nowhere else in Virginia that Clara had ever been able to find bloomed in quiet and continued to bloom and asked nothing from anyone except to be left alone. Clara had documented 12 distinct species in this valley over 2 years of visits. She had pressed specimens and labeled them. She had written detailed descriptions in the margins of her sketches. She had borrowed a botanical reference text from the County Lending Library 3 separate times, returning it each time, only because she could not afford to keep it, and she had corresponded with the Philadelphia Botanical Society. who had written back to say they would be very interested in a full documentation. She had told her aunt about the correspondence. Her Aunt Margaret had looked at the letter and said, "That's wonderful, Clara," in the tone of a woman who was simultaneously proud and deeply worried that her niece was spending time on something that would not keep them warm in January. Clara had folded the letter carefully and put it in her notebook. She was thinking about that letter now, standing at the edge of the valley, looking at the survey stakes that had been driven into the ground along the meadow's perimeter. They were wooden, painted red at the tips. There were 11 of them. She walked the perimeter and counted everyone, 11 stakes. A complete boundary line, a map already made, a decision already in motion, a valley already scheduled for drainage and leveling before anyone who cared about it had been told it was in danger. She pulled the first stake out of the ground. She was pulling the third one when she heard the horse. She did not startle. She made herself finish pulling the stake before she turned. The horse was dark, almost black, built heavy, the kind of animal that cost more than most Willow Creek families saw in a year. The man on its back sat still in the saddle the way men sit still when stillness is a habit rather than an effort. His coat was plain in cut but fine in cloth. His jaw was set. His eyes were the color of deep water, not blue exactly, more the gray-green of a river just before a storm, and they were fixed on her with an expression that had not yet decided what it was. He looked at the stakes in her hand. He looked at the ones still standing around the perimeter. He looked at her. "You want to tell me," he said slowly, "what you think you're doing?" "Removing survey markers," Clara said. "I can see that." His voice was low, and even the kind of voice that was accustomed to being the final word in a room. "I'm asking why. Because whoever put them there didn't have the right to." A pause. "This is my land." "Yes," Clara said, "which means it's your responsibility. And whoever put these markers here was not acting in your interest, they were acting in their own." She looked at him steadily. "Unless you personally ordered the drainage of this valley." "Did you?" Something shifted in his expression. "Who are you?" he asked. "Clara Whitmore." She watched the name land, watched something change behind his eyes, a recognition, a slight tightening, the particular expression of a man who has just heard something that confirms a thought he had been trying not to finish. "George Whitmore's daughter," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father worked this land." "For 19 years, Clara said. "He's been gone 3 winters. I don't know if you knew that." "I knew." She studied him. "Did you know he wrote to the estate office every season for the last 4 years of his life? About this valley. About what grows here, about why it matters." The man's jaw tightened. Did you know," she continued, her voice still steady, still even, carrying no heat because heat was a luxury she could not afford right now, that every single one of those letters was filed and never answered? That they're sitting in a cabinet in your office right now, tied with a cord, labeled as routine tenant correspondence requiring no attention. Silence. He dismounted. She had not expected that. He came down from the horse in one smooth motion and stood on the ground and was taller than she had expected, not just in height, but in the particular gravity of someone whose presence rearranges the air around it. He tied the horse to a low branch without looking at it, which meant he was already looking at her, and he walked toward her with an even stride that stopped at a respectful distance. He looked at the stake in her hand. "How many?" he said. 11 markers. A full perimeter. They were here to map the drainage route. The spring would be redirected, the depression filled and leveled. The botanical specimens. She stopped, started over. Everything growing in this valley would be destroyed. "Carlyle ordered this." "Carlyle ordered it and didn't tell you." She held his gaze. "Did he?" Another silence this time. "No," he said. "He did not." Clara looked at him carefully. She had spent her life learning to read people not because she was particularly gifted at it, but because reading people was a survival skill when you had no money and no connections, and the difference between a man who was sorry and a man who was performing sorry could mean the difference between keeping your home and losing it. This man looked sorry in the way that people look sorry when they have just understood the full size of what they failed to prevent. That was different. That was harder to fake. "Come with me," he said. The office was not the grand formal study she had imagined. It was a working room, maps on the walls, ledgers on the shelves, a desk buried under papers that were clearly being actively used rather than displayed. The kind of room where a man actually ran something. Nathaniel went directly to the filing cabinet along the south wall. Second drawer from the top. He opened it, looked at it, and then reached in and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with a cord. He set them on the desk. He did not say anything. Clara crossed the room and untied the cord and spread the letters across the desk's surface, and she saw her father's handwriting on the first envelope, and her breath left her body all at once, a quiet, sudden exit. Like something she had been holding for 3 years, finally put down. To the attention of the estate management, Hawthorne Estate, Willow Creek, Virginia. Dated June 14, 1814. She opened it. Her father's voice came off the page at her, careful, precise, respectful without being servile, and she read, "I write to bring to your attention a matter of some significance regarding the natural valley situated behind the South Orchard. In my 19 years of service to this land, I have not encountered another place of its particular character. What grows there does not grow elsewhere on the estate, and I believe does not grow elsewhere in this county. I ask only that this be noted before any development decisions are made regarding the back acreage. I remain your faithful servant, George Whitmore." Clara set the letter down. She picked up the next one, and the next, season after season, year after year, her father writing in his careful hand, explaining, documenting, asking, always asking, never demanding, because a man in his position did not demand anything from the people who owned the ground he stood on. Asking and being filed away unread. "He wrote to you every season," she said. Her voice was absolutely controlled, for 4 years. "I know that now," Nathaniel said. She looked up. "You didn't know before?" "No, Carlyle told you the routine correspondence required no attention." "Yes, and you trusted that." He met her eyes directly. "Yes, I trusted that, and I should not have." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you came here with the truth," he said. "The least I can do is meet you with it." She was not ready to call it honesty, not yet. Honesty was easy when the damage was already visible, and the guilt was fresh, and someone was standing in front of you, holding the evidence. What mattered was what came next. "The family," she said. "The Maddox family, the Picketts, the Harrows, and the Baines. Notices were sent in your name." Nathaniel's expression didn't change, but something behind it did, a hardening, the kind that comes not from anger outward but from anger inward, the kind a man directs at himself. "How many?" he said. "4 that I know of. There may be more." "When?" "The Picketts in November. The others through winter and into spring." "The notices carried my seal." "Yes." He turned to the filing cabinet. Opened the top drawer this time. Pulled out a stack of copies, carbon duplicates, the kind kept for state records, and spread them on the desk beside her father's letters. She watched his face as he read them. She watched him go completely still. "These are not," he stopped. "These terms are not the standing lease agreements. These are looked up." Carlyle modified the terms. "These aren't renewals. These are terminations with cause." "With cause," Clara repeated, citing non-payment. He set the paper down. "The Pickett family. Thomas Pickett," Clara said carefully, "has not missed a payment in 11 years. "I know that." "Then the records are false." "Yes," he said. "They are." The word fell into the room and sat there. "Falsified records. Forged cause. Families put out of their homes in the name of a man who had not known and had not checked and had trusted someone who had used that trust like a key to a room full of other people's lives." Nathaniel set the papers down. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Yes, I want you to stay." She looked at him. "I want you to finish your documentation of the valley," he said. "With full access. And I want you to tell me everything you know, every family affected, every notice, every change Carlyle has made since I returned." He paused. "I should have been asking these questions 18 months ago. I am asking them now." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Why me?" she said. "Because you came through that gate this morning, with the truth in your hands, and you didn't flinch when I looked at you," he said. And because your father spent 19 years caring for something that belonged to someone else, as though it belonged to his own soul. And that is not the kind of thing I intend to waste." She looked at her father's letters spread across the desk. Season after season, all that faithful, careful work. All that hope filed away and forgotten. She thought about the mountain spurge. The spring. The 11 survey stakes she had pulled from the ground. She thought about what her father had said, the last coherent thing, in the last conscious hour. "Don't let them fill in the valley." "All right," she said. Not warmly, not with relief, with the steady, level voice of a woman who has agreed to something hard and knows it and is not pretending otherwise. Nathaniel nodded. He did not smile. He did not offer his hand. He simply said, "Thank you," and picked up the falsified records. And began for the first time in 18 months to truly pay attention to the land his family had left him. Clara walked home through the back fields as the sun dropped behind the ridge. She had been inside Hawthorne Estate for 4 hours. She had pulled 11 survey stakes from the ground. She had read every letter her father had ever sent, in the estate office of the man who should have received them. She had agreed to come back. She passed the iron gate on her way out. It was still open left that way, she realized, since she had pushed through it that morning. She stopped, turned back, looked at the gate standing open in the evening light, rust brown against the darkening sky. Her father had worked this land for 19 years, and never once been invited through that gate. She had pushed through it on her own this morning and come back out with an invitation. She did not know yet what Nathaniel Hawthorne was, whether he was a man who would act or a man who would feel sorry and change nothing. She did not know whether what she had seen in that office was genuine reckoning or polished performance. She did not know whether his trust in her was real, or whether she was being managed, being given just enough to keep her quiet. She knew that Edmund Carlyle was somewhere on this estate right now, with his falsified records and his survey maps and his plans for the valley. Not yet knowing that the woman who had pulled his stakes from the ground had spent 4 hours in his employer's office. She knew that Thomas Pickett was at home, hat in hand, running out of time. She knew that 11 survey stakes were lying on the grass of the valley, and that the spring was still running, and that the mountain spurge was still there, still growing in the only place on earth where it grew. For now, she turned away from the gate and walked home through the warm evening air, and she did not let herself feel hope not yet, not until she had reason to trust it. But she did not feel alone either, and for tonight that was enough. The next morning, Clara arrived at the estate gate at 7 o'clock. She had not slept well. Not because she was afraid she had made her decision and she stood behind it, but because her Aunt Margaret had been awake when she got home the night before, sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low and the account ledger open. And the look on her face when Clara walked in was the look of a woman who has been running numbers she does not like. "Where have you been?" Margaret said. "The estate." Margaret set down her pencil. "Claire, I know. You walked onto Hawthorne land." "I did. After I specifically—" "He was there," Clara said. "Nathaniel Hawthorne. He was there and I spoke to him and he listened. He didn't throw me off the property. He asked me to come back." Margaret stared at her for a long moment. The lamplight caught the lines around her eyes, lines that had deepened considerably in the 3 years since George Whitmore died, and the weight of keeping the cottage fell entirely on her shoulders. "Asked you to come back," she repeated. "Yes. For what purpose?" "To help him understand what Carlyle has been doing." Clara sat down across from her. "Aunt Margaret, he didn't know about the letters, about the families, about any of it. Carlyle kept everything from him." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "And you believe that?" "I believe what I saw in his face when he read Father's letters." "Men can look however they need to look, Clara. I know that." She met her aunt's eyes. "I also know that falsified records don't lie. And I saw the records. Carlyle forged the cause on the eviction notices. Thomas Pickett's account was listed as delinquent. 11 years of payments in Carlyle marked him delinquent." Margaret's hand went flat on the table. "That's a crime," she said quietly. Yes, Clara said. It is. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the night insects were loud against the dark. Be careful, Margaret said finally. Promise me that. I promise. Margaret looked at the ledger. Then she closed it. The Harrows got their notice last week, she said. I didn't tell you. I didn't want you. She stopped. Ellen Harrow came to me yesterday. She's got 3 children. The youngest is 4 months old. Clara felt that land somewhere in her chest and stay there. I know, she said. You fix this, Margaret said. It was not a request, it was not a plea. It was the flat iron voice of a woman who had been patient long enough. Whatever you have to do, you fix this, Clara nodded. She had not slept after that. She had lain in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about Ellen Harrow's 4-month-old and Topicat's 8 in his hands, and her father's careful voice coming off the pages of letters that had sat in a filing cabinet for 4 years. By 6 in the morning she was already dressed. By 7 she was at the gate. It was standing open. Nathaniel was in the estate office when she arrived. He had clearly been there for some time. The desk was more organized than it had been the previous afternoon. The falsified records separated into one pile, the original lease documents in another, and a third pile she did not recognize at all. He looked up when she came in. He did not greet her the way a man greets a guest. He greeted her the way a man greets someone he has been waiting for, because there is work to do. I found more, he said. She crossed to the desk. What kind of more? Accounts. He pointed to the third pile. Carlyle has been managing the rental income directly. The payments come in, he records them, he deposits to the estate account, except the deposits don't match the records. There's a gap, he looked at her, a consistent gap. Every quarter for the past year and a half, Clara looked at the columns of figures. She was not an accountant, but she was a woman who had grown up watching her aunt keep household accounts on a careful margin, and she knew what a gap looked like. How much? Nathaniel told her. She looked up sharply. That is not a clerical error, she said. No, he said. It is not. She pulled up a chair and sat down, and for the next 2 hours they went through the accounts together, Clara reading figures aloud, Nathaniel cross-referencing against the original agreements. Both of them building a picture that was worse the further back they went. Carlyle had been systematic, he had not been reckless. He had skimmed carefully, never enough in any single quarter to trigger obvious alarm, but consistent and patient over 18 months. He started the month you returned from the war, Clara said. She had the dates laid out in front of her. Look. The gap begins here. October 1815. Nathaniel looked at the date. When I was grieving James and not paying attention to anything, he said flatly. Yes, his jaw was tight, he knew that. He timed it. He knew you trusted him, Clara said. He knew you weren't going to check. A silence. I owe you an apology, Nathaniel said. Clara looked up. For what? For every letter your father sent that I didn't read. He met her eyes directly. I trusted Carlyle to tell me what required my attention. That was my failure, Miss Whitmore, not his alone. Mine. She studied him. It was still possible this was performance. She was still watching for the signs, the slight overemphasis, the careful positioning, the way men sometimes arrange their guilt to be flattering to themselves. She did not see those signs. What she saw was a man who was genuinely angry. Not at her, not at the situation, at himself, and who was doing something very specific with that anger, turning it into something useful, something directed, instead of letting it scatter outward and damage whoever happened to be nearby. That was not a common thing. She filed it away without comment. What are you going to do about the families? She said. He had already written 3 letters by the time she arrived, she learned. One to the county land registrar, one to his family's solicitor in Richmond. One to Thomas Pickett. He handed her the letter to Thomas Pickett. She read it. It was short, direct. It said that the notice of eviction issued in November was being formally rescinded, that the account records had been reviewed and found to contain errors, and that Thomas Pickett's lease was reinstated in full, with an apology for any distress the incorrect notice had caused. At the bottom, in Nathaniel's own handwriting, your neighbor, George Whitmore's daughter, brought this to my attention. The debt I owe her father for his service to this land I cannot repay. The least I can do is begin with this." Clara read that line. She set the letter down. She did not say anything for a moment. "The other families?" she said when she trusted her voice. "The same. I'm writing to all 4 today." He paused. "Are there others you know of? Beyond the 4? "I don't know for certain. But if Carlyle was systematic about the accounts, he may have been systematic about other things too." She hesitated. "There's a family on the north edge of the tenant row. The Coopers. I haven't seen their name on a notice, but they've been quiet lately in a way that worries me. Eleanor Cooper stopped coming to the market 2 months ago." Nathaniel nodded. "I'll check the records." She watched him write it down. Just like that, no argument, no qualifications, no "I'll look into it when I have time." He wrote it down and moved on. She decided to push. "What about Carlyle?" she said. Nathaniel looked up. "He's still on the estate," she said. "He doesn't know yet that you've found any of this. Which means right now he's going about his business as though everything is normal." She paused. "If he realizes what you know before you're ready, he'll destroy what he can and disappear before you can act." Nathaniel's expression sharpened. "You think he'd run?" "I think a man who has been stealing from you for 18 months while standing in your house and calling himself your trusted manager has already demonstrated that he will do whatever serves him best." She held his gaze. "Yes, I think he would run." "What would you do?" Nathaniel said. She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "If you were in my position." "What would you do first?" It was a genuine question. She could tell the difference. This was not a man testing her or entertaining himself. This was a man who was out of his depth in a specific way, who understood land and accounts and military tactics and perhaps the management of a large estate in the abstract, but who did not have the particular knowledge she had, which was the knowledge of how people in this county worked, who they trusted, how they communicated, what a man like Carlyle would do when he felt the ground shift under his feet. She thought for a moment. "The solicitor's letter," she said. "The one to Richmond. How long before you receive a response?" 3 days, perhaps 4, and the land registrar?" "I'm delivering that one in person today." She nodded slowly. "Then you have 4 days, maybe 3. She leaned forward slightly. "Give Carlyle something to do, something that takes him off the estate. Send him on an errand that will keep him occupied for 2 or 3 days, something plausible, something that fits his usual duties. While he's gone, you finish pulling the records together. When he comes back, you have everything." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "You've thought about this kind of thing before," he said. "I've spent my life watching people with very little power navigate around people with a great deal of it," she said. "You learn certain things." Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. She would have closed like a door if she had seen pity. Something more like recognition, the particular attention of a person seeing something clearly for the first time. "There's a supply run," he said slowly. "The estate needs timber from the Fredericksburg yard. It's been on the schedule for a month. Carlyle would normally manage the ordering." "Send him to Fredericksburg," Clara said. Nathaniel nodded. He reached for a fresh sheet of paper. She watched him write the instructions in a steady, unhurried hand. And she thought, this is either the beginning of something that matters, or it is a very convincing imitation of one. She was not ready to decide which, but she stayed at the desk. And they kept working. Carlyle arrived at the office at 10:30. Clara heard him before he appeared, the particular heavy footfall of a man who walks as though the floors belong to him, which in Carlyle's case was a habit he had apparently developed over 18 months of being trusted too completely and checked too rarely. She had been expecting this moment. She had been braced for it. She had told herself she would be calm, that she would give nothing away, that she would sit at the desk as though she had every right to be there, which she did, because Nathaniel had asked her to be there. And his word on this estate outweighed Carlyle's by every measure that mattered. Carlyle opened the door and stopped. He looked at Clara. He looked at the papers on the desk. He looked at Nathaniel. and in the space of roughly 2 seconds, she watched something flash across his face, not quite fear, not quite anger, something between them, something that had the quality of a man doing rapid calculations. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said. His voice was smooth. "I didn't realize you had company." "Miss Whitmore has been assisting me with a review of the estate accounts," Nathaniel said. His voice was completely level. "Edmund, I need you to travel to Fredericksburg. The timber order has been sitting long enough. I'd like it resolved this week." Carlyle's eyes moved back to Clara, the accounts. "The quarterly figures," Nathaniel said. "Nothing that need concern you at the moment. The Fredericksburg order is more pressing. We're behind on the north fence repairs, and I'd like to have the lumber here before the month is out." A pause, very brief. The kind of pause a man makes when he is deciding how much he knows and how much he can afford to show that he knows it. "Of course," Carlyle said. "I can leave tomorrow morning." "Today would be better," Nathaniel said pleasantly. "The weather's good. No sense in losing the day." Another pause. "Longer today," Carlyle repeated, "if it's not too much trouble." Carlyle smiled. It was a perfectly constructed smile, warm, cooperative, the smile of a man who is delighted to be helpful. "Not at all, sir. I'll make the arrangements." He glanced at Clara one more time before he left. It was a brief glance, assessing, the kind of glance that files a thing away for later use. Clara held it without expression. The door closed. She let out a slow breath. "He knows something is wrong," she said quietly. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "He's not a stupid man, no." She looked at the closed door. "He's not." She went to the valley that afternoon. Nathaniel had suggested it not to get her out of the office. She thought, but because he genuinely understood that the documentation was urgent, that the survey stakes being removed did not mean the threat was gone, only paused. He had asked her to continue where she had left off and had given her a key to the back gate that led out behind the orchard. She spent 3 hours in the valley with her notebook. She documented 2 of the unidentified specimens in the northwest corner, pressing careful samples between the pages and annotating each sketch with the date, the weather, the condition of the soil. She measured the spring's flow rate with a method her father had shown her, a flat stone and a measured interval, and compared it to notes from 2 years prior. The flow was unchanged. She was crouching near the eastern edge, annotating a particularly good sketch of the spurge, when she heard someone behind her. She turned. Eleanor Beaumont was standing at the edge of the valley, which was remarkable for several reasons. Not least of which was that Eleanor Beaumont had no obvious reason to be on this part of the estate. She was the daughter of the neighboring Beaumont family, old Virginia gentry. And the particular strip of back acreage between the orchard and the valley was not on any path that led from Beaumont land to anywhere a woman of Eleanor's station would ordinarily go. She was 28 years old, dressed simply by her standards, which still meant better than most of Willow Creek on a Sunday, and she was looking at Clara with an expression that mixed curiosity with a kind of careful, measuring intelligence that Clara had not expected. "You're the Whitmore girl," Eleanor said. "I am," Clara said. She straightened. "Miss Beaumont, my maid told me you were seen going through the estate gate this morning." Eleanor tilted her head slightly. "And yesterday morning, and coming out last evening after dark." "Your maid is observant. Everyone in Willow Creek is observant, Miss Whitmore. It's a small village. New things get noticed." She paused. "A village woman spending 2 consecutive days inside Hawthorne Estate is a very new thing." Clara studied her. She had not prepared for this particular conversation. She had been focused on Carlyle, on the accounts, on the families, on the valley. She had not factored in Eleanor Beaumont, which was, she recognized now, an oversight. "Mr. Hawthorne has asked me to assist with some estate matters," Clara said carefully. "Estate matters," Eleanor repeated. "That's very diplomatic." She looked at the notebook in Clara's hands. "Is that botanical work?" "Yes." "May I see?" It was a surprising request. Clara looked at her for a moment, then held out the notebook. Eleanor took it and looked at the most recent sketch, the mountain spurge, carefully rendered, annotated in Clara's small handwriting. She studied it for a longer moment than Clara had expected. "You drew this," Eleanor said. "Yes, you're good." She handed the notebook back. My grandmother was a botanical illustrator. A pause. She was told it was an unsuitable interest for a woman of her position. She did it anyway. Clara looked at her. She sounds like someone worth knowing. She was. Eleanor looked at the valley, really looked at it, not the careless glance of someone passing through, but the sustained attention of a person who sees something she was not expecting. What grows here? 12 documented species at minimum. Possibly more. Clara paused, then made a decision. Including what I believe may be a variant of mountain spurge that doesn't exist anywhere else in Virginia. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, and Carlyle wants to drain it. Clara stared at her. You know about that? I know about most things that happen on the boundary between the Beaumont and Hawthorne properties, Eleanor said. She met Clara's eyes. My father and Nathaniel Hawthorne have a pending agreement. Land and other considerations. I've been aware of it for some time. A pause. I've been aware of a great many things for some time. What kind of agreement? Clara said. Eleanor looked at her steadily. The kind that was made between two old families when neither of the principals was consulted. She let that sit for a moment. The kind that Carlyle has been using as leverage. Telling my father that if Hawthorne develops the western land, the combined property value would increase the terms considerably. Clara felt the shape of something she had not seen before beginning to emerge, larger than the falsified records, larger than the drainage plan, something that connected the pieces she had been looking at separately into a single, uglier pattern. Carlyle has been talking to your father, she said slowly. Regularly, Eleanor said, for months, and using the development plan to sweeten an agreement that Nathaniel Hawthorne may not even have known the details of. Eleanor said nothing, which was itself an answer. Clara sat down on the grass. She did not plan to her legs, simply made the decision. She sat down and looked at her notebook and thought about Edmund Carlyle in Fredericksburg right now, traveling to an errand he had agreed to with that smooth, constructed smile, and she thought about what he would do when he got there. She thought about whether he would come back at all. Miss Beaumont, she said. Eleanor. She looked up. How much of this does your father know? About the falsified records? About the stolen income? None of it, Eleanor said. My father is not a dishonest man. He's a man who has been told what he wanted to hear by someone who understood what he wanted. She paused. He wants the land agreement to go through. He's been told it will. He doesn't know how Carlyle has been managing that outcome. Clara was quiet for a moment. And you? I've known something was wrong for months, Eleanor said. I didn't know how wrong. She looked directly at Clara. I came here today because I heard you'd been seen at the estate, and I thought that if anyone had gotten close enough to see what was actually happening, it might be the woman who was willing to walk through that gate in the first place. A pause. Was I right? Clara looked at her, looked at the notebook. Looked at the valley. Yes, she said, you were right. They walked back to the estate office together, which Clara suspected was a site that would generate considerable comment in Willow Creek. Clara Whitmore and Eleanor Beaumont arriving at Hawthorne Estate side by side, both of them carrying information the other needed. Nathaniel looked up when they came in. He looked at Eleanor. Something complicated moved across his face, not hostility, not warmth exactly, but the careful expression of a man navigating a situation that had more dimensions than he had anticipated. Eleanor, he said, Nathaniel. She sat down without being invited. I understand you've found some irregularities in the estate accounts. That information traveled fast. Miss Whitmore was in the valley. She glanced at Clara. We talked. He looked at Clara. She knows about the land agreement, Clara said. And about Carlyle's relationship with her father. And she has information you need. She paused. So does he need to hear it, or are we going to observe the social niceties? A beat. Nathaniel almost smiled. It was brief, barely there, but it was real. Tell me, he said to Eleanor. Eleanor told him. It took the better part of an hour. She laid it out methodically, her father's meetings with Carlyle, the terms she had overheard, the development proposals Carlyle had been presenting, as though they were Nathaniel's own plans. the way he had been cultivating the Beaumont family's expectations while simultaneously stripping the estate's tenant income and covering his tracks. The picture that emerged was this: Carlyle had not simply been stealing. He had been executing a longer plan. He intended to use the land sale, once the western acreage was cleared and drained, and its value increased, to broker a commission from both sides of the Hawthorne-Beaumont agreement. He had been positioning himself for 18 months to profit handsomely from a transaction neither of the principals fully understood. When Eleanor finished, the room was quiet. Nathaniel stood at the window with his back to them. Clara watched the line of his shoulders. "He used my name," Nathaniel said. Very quietly. "He used my seal. He made plans in my name with my neighbors and stole from my tenants and buried my mail, and he did all of it while I was standing in this house not paying attention." "Yes," Clara said. He turned. His expression was controlled but barely. "Miss Whitmore, the families, the 4 notices, are any of those families already gone?" "Not yet. The Maddox family was due to vacate next week." "Then we have time." He moved to the desk. "I need to send a rider to Fredericksburg." Clara looked up sharply. No, his jaw was set hard. "To the county magistrate. I want a man in Fredericksburg before Carlyle decides the timber run was an excuse to keep traveling." He looked at her. "You were right this morning." He knew something was wrong. "I could see it." "He won't run," Nathaniel said. "Because we're going to make sure there's nowhere to run to." He picked up a fresh sheet of paper. "The solicitor in Richmond is already expecting my letter. The land registrar is already aware. If the magistrate is waiting in Fredericksburg, then whatever Carlyle decides to do when he gets there, he does it in front of a witness with authority." Clara looked at him. She had come through that gate yesterday morning expecting to find she did not know what she had expected to find. Resistance, maybe. Indifference. The polished deflection of a wealthy man who had no particular reason to listen to a tenant's daughter standing in his meadow with a fistful of survey stakes. She had not expected this. She had not expected a man who, when confronted with the full size of his own failure, did not defend it or minimize it or redirect, who simply turned it around and asked what needed to be done and then did it. She was not ready to call it trust. She was not ready to call it anything. But she was watching. "Miss Whitmore," Nathaniel said, without looking up from the paper he was writing. "Yes. Will you be here tomorrow?" She thought about her aunt at the kitchen table. About Ellen Harrow's 4-month-old. About Thomas Pickett's letter, already written, sitting on the desk with Nathaniel's note at the bottom about her father. She thought about the mountain spurge, still growing in the valley outside. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He kept writing. Eleanor glanced at Clara across the desk, and her expression said something that Eleanor herself did not say aloud, something like, "I see what's happening here. And also, be careful. And also, underneath both of those things, I think you're going to be all right." Clara looked back at the notebook in her hands. She opened it to a fresh page. She picked up her pencil. Outside, the afternoon was moving toward evening, the light going long and golden across the estate grounds, and somewhere in Fredericksburg a man with a constructed smile was running an errand he had agreed to a little too smoothly. And the county magistrate was going to be on the next road east, and 4 families in Willow Creek were going to wake up tomorrow morning, one day closer to knowing they could stay. Clara pressed her pencil to the page. She began to draw. The magistrate's rider came back from Fredericksburg on the 3rd day. Clara was in the estate office when he arrived. She had been there every morning since the 2nd day, arriving at 7, working through the accounts with Nathaniel until midday, then spending the afternoons in the valley with her notebook. It had become a rhythm without either of them formally establishing it. She simply showed up, and he was already at the desk. And they worked, and it was efficient, and neither of them commented on the fact that it had become expected. The rider was dusty and tired, and delivered his report standing in the doorway with his hat in his hand. Carlyle had not gone to the timber yard. He had stopped in Fredericksburg long enough to send 2 letters. The postal clerk remembered him. Remembered the letters because one was addressed to a law firm in Richmond, and one was addressed to a name the magistrate's man recognized immediately: Robert Beaumont. Eleanor's father. Then Carlyle had gotten back on his horse and ridden south. Not toward Willow Creek south. Clara watched Nathaniel's face when the rider finished speaking. She watched him absorb it, the confirmation of everything they had suspected, and the addition of something worse. Carlyle had not simply run. He had communicated first. He had sent letters before disappearing. Which meant that whatever he had written to Robert Beaumont and to the Richmond law firm, those letters were already traveling, already in motion, already doing whatever damage he had designed them to do. "Thank you," Nathaniel said to the rider. "Get some rest." The door closed. The silence in the room was the kind that has a shape to it. "He wrote to my father," Clara said. "Yes," before he ran. "Yes." She looked at Nathaniel. "What did he send them?" "I don't know yet." He was already at the cabinet, pulling the folder of estate documents he had been assembling. For the past 2 days, the original lease agreements, the falsified records, the account discrepancies. All of it organized and annotated in the careful way of a man building a case. "But we need to know before those letters arrive." "Eleanor," Clara said immediately. He looked at her. "Eleanor knows her father's household. She knows who sorts the mail, who brings it to him, how long it sits before he reads it. If we reach her before those letters arrive," she was already moving toward the door. "How long does a letter take from Fredericksburg to the Beaumont house?" 2 days. Maybe then we have today." She stopped at the door. "I'll go to her." Clara. It was the first time he had used her given name. They both noticed it. He did not correct it. She did not react to it. "Be careful what you tell her," he said. "Not because I don't trust her. Because the more she knows, the more danger she's in if Carlyle has allies we haven't found yet." She nodded. "I know." She went. Eleanor was in her family's garden when Clara arrived, which was both convenient and inconvenient. Convenient because it meant Clara could reach her without going through the household. Inconvenient because the garden was visible from 3 of the house's main windows, and a conversation there was not exactly private. Eleanor took one look at Clara's face and said, "Walk with me." They walked to the far edge of the property, past the kitchen garden and the old apple trees until they were well out of earshot of any window. "He ran," Eleanor said. "It was not a question. He sent letters first. One to a law firm in Richmond, one to your father." Eleanor stopped walking. "What would he send my father?" she said. "That's what I need you to think about." Clara kept her voice low and even. "What does Carlyle know about your family that he could use? What has your father told him, trusted him with, that Carlyle might be able to turn into leverage?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that meant she was thinking hard and did not like what she was thinking. "The agreement," she said finally. "The land agreement with Hawthorne Estate. My father signed preliminary terms 8 months ago." Carlyle witnessed it. She paused. Those terms included a clause about the western acreage. If the land was developed and the value assessed above a certain threshold, the Beaumont family had rights to a portion of the increased revenue as part of the marriage settlement. Clara stared at her. "A marriage settlement." Eleanor met her eyes. "Yes, between me and Nathaniel Hawthorne." Eleanor's voice was completely level. "An agreement made by our fathers. I have never been asked about it. Nathaniel, to my knowledge, has never been told the full terms." She paused. Carlyle knew every clause. Clara felt the ground shift slightly under her. She made herself stand still on it. "If Carlyle sends your father a letter claiming the land agreement is in jeopardy," she said slowly, "claiming that Nathaniel is backing out of the development plan, and therefore the revenue clause." "My father will go to Nathaniel directly," Eleanor said. "Demanding answers, probably with the family solicitor. Probably in a way that makes it look like Nathaniel is the one acting in bad faith." She looked at Clara steadily. "And in the middle of all that noise and confusion, whatever Carlyle has done to the accounts becomes very difficult to examine clearly, because the Hawthorne and Beaumont families are too busy arguing about a land deal to look at what's actually happened to the rental income." Clara pressed her hand flat against the nearest apple tree. "Just for a moment. Just to feel something solid. He planned this," she said. "Before he ran, he planned for this exact situation." He's had 18 months to plan, Eleanor said quietly. He knew eventually someone would find the accounts. He needed an exit that created enough chaos to cover his trail. She paused. We were the chaos. Our families, fighting over an agreement neither of us wanted, while he was already 3 counties south. Clara looked at her. You said neither of us. I said what I meant. You don't want the marriage agreement. Eleanor looked at the house, the solid, expensive, carefully maintained house of a family that had been making decisions about her future since before she was old enough to have opinions about it. Nathaniel Hawthorne is not a bad man. I've known him since we were children. But no, Miss Whitmore, I do not want a marriage that was arranged by my father and his land manager to benefit a revenue clause. She met Clara's eyes. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Clara understood. She understood more than Eleanor was directly saying. She filed it away and kept moving. The letter, she said. We need to intercept it before your father reads it. Or at minimum, we need to be in that room when he does. Eleanor nodded once. Come to dinner tonight. Clara blinked. I beg your pardon? Come to dinner. I'll tell my father I've invited a friend. He won't think anything of it. She paused. And when the mail arrives, it comes in the evening, usually before supper. We'll be there. Your father doesn't know me. My father knows who George Whitmore was, Eleanor said. He knew your father by reputation. He won't turn away his daughter. She looked at Clara steadily. Can you be presentable by 6 o'clock? Clara thought of her wardrobe. The situation was not promising. I'll manage, she said. She stopped at the estate on the way home. Nathaniel was still at the desk. He had not stopped working. She could see more papers pulled, more documents cross-referenced, the organized pile now twice the size it had been that morning. He looked up when she came in, and she told him everything Eleanor had said. She watched his face when she got to the part about the marriage agreement. He was very still for a moment. The revenue clause, he said. Yes, my father signed preliminary terms, apparently. Without telling me the full conditions. Without telling you the full conditions. She paused. Did you know about the agreement at all? I knew there was a long-standing understanding between the families. He set down his pen. I did not know there were signed preliminary terms. I did not know there was a revenue clause tied to the Western development. He was quiet for a moment. I did not know Carlyle had witnessed the signing. Clara let that sit. He was positioned on every side of this, Nathaniel said. Very quietly, the accounts, the evictions, the development plan. The marriage agreement. Every piece of it connects back to him. Yes, and every piece of it, he said, was made possible because I trusted him and did not look. She did not offer comfort. She did not say you couldn't have known, or anyone would have made the same mistake. She did not say those things because they were not quite true, and he would know they were not quite true, and she respected him too much to offer him the easy version. You're looking now, she said. He met her eyes. Eleanor is taking me to dinner at the Beaumont house tonight, she said. We think the letter arrives this evening. We need to be there when Robert Beaumont reads it. You're going to the Beaumont house, he said slowly. Yes, to intercept a letter that Carlyle wrote to Robert Beaumont about a land agreement that involves, among other things, Eleanor's marriage prospects and my family's western acreage. Yes, a pause, and your plan when you get there. Honesty, she said. Tell Robert Beaumont what we know before Carlyle's version of events has time to take root. She met his gaze steadily. I have the account records, the real ones. I'll take copies tonight. If Robert Beaumont is not a dishonest man and Eleanor says he isn't, then seeing the actual figures before Carlyle's letter has a chance to work on him gives us a better chance than waiting. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. That's a significant gamble, Miss Whitmore. Most of the good options are, she said. Do you have a better one? He did not. Take the originals, he said, not copies. If you're going to make a case to Robert Beaumont tonight, you make it with the real documents. She nodded. All right, and Clara, she stopped. If it goes wrong tonight, if Beaumont has already spoken to Carlyle, or if he reacts badly, you come directly back here. Do not argue with him. Do not push. Come back and we find another way. He held her gaze. Promise me that. She looked at him. There it was again, that thing she did not quite have a name for yet. Not warmth, not quite. Something more careful than warmth. Something that had been built slowly, piece by piece, over 3 days of sitting across a desk from each other, pulling apart the evidence of another man's betrayal. And it was not romance. Or not only that, it was something harder and more durable. The thing that happens between people who have seen each other, think clearly under pressure, and have not been disappointed. I promise, she said. She took the documents and went to get ready for dinner. Robert Beaumont was exactly the man Eleanor had described, not dishonest, not cruel, but so thoroughly convinced of his own reasonableness that he had never developed the habit of questioning whether the information he received was shaped to serve someone else's purpose. He was 60 years old, broad across the shoulders, with the comfortable authority of a man who had always had enough. He greeted Clara with genuine courtesy. He had known her father, he said, and said it with the particular warmth that people use when they want to acknowledge a loss without dwelling in it. They sat to dinner. Eleanor guided the conversation with the ease of a woman who had been managing social situations in this house since she was old enough to sit at the table, steering away from the estate, away from the Hawthorne name, keeping things light until the meal was nearly finished. The mail came at 7:30. Clara saw Eleanor's hand tighten briefly on her water glass. The housekeeper brought it in on a small tray and set it at Robert Beaumont's elbow the way she always did, and Robert Beaumont did what he always did, reached for it, without particular urgency, sorting through the envelopes with the unhurried attention of a man who expected nothing alarming. He found Carlyle's letter third in the stack. Clara recognized the handwriting from the estate records. She watched Robert Beaumont open it. She watched him read. She watched his expression change. It started as a small thing, a slight deepening of the lines between his brows, a very minor shift in how he held his shoulders. Then the small thing became a larger thing. She could see him reading faster, his eyes moving more quickly across the page, the way eyes move when the content is escalating and the reader is trying to get ahead of it. He set the letter down. He looked at Clara, not with hostility, with the particular careful assessment of a man who has just read something that named a person sitting at his dinner table and is trying to decide how much of what he read is true. Miss Whitmore, he said, how long have you been working with Nathaniel Hawthorne? 3 days, she said. And in those 3 days, what exactly have you been doing? Reviewing the estate accounts, she said, at Mr. Hawthorne's request. Carlyle writes that you have been feeding Nathaniel false information about the estate management, Robert Beaumont said. He writes that you have a personal grievance against him, against Carlyle, specifically related to your family's tenancy, and that you have used that grievance to poison Nathaniel's trust in his own manager. Eleanor said quietly and precisely, Father. He writes, Robert Beaumont continued, his voice still measured, still controlled, that the accounts are being misrepresented, and that Nathaniel is using the confusion to back out of the preliminary agreement terms. Clara reached into the satchel she had brought. She set the documents on the table. The originals, not copies, as Nathaniel had said. The real figures, the real records, the falsified eviction notices with the real payment histories alongside them. She set them down one by one without speaking, in the order that told the clearest story. Robert Beaumont looked at them. He did not pick them up immediately. He looked at them the way a man looks at something he is not sure he wants to touch, because touching it means accepting that it is real. That is the rental account ledger for the past 18 months, Clara said. The left column is what the tenants paid, as documented in the original receipt records. The right column is what was deposited to the estate account. The difference, the consistent quarterly gap, is money that was received and not deposited. She pointed to the eviction notices. Those are the notices sent in Mr. Hawthorne's name, citing non-payment of rent. The names on those notices: the Pickett family, the Maddox family, the Harrows, the Baines, every one of them has a payment history that shows no delinquency. The cause cited on the notices is false. She paused. Mr. Carlyle prepared these documents and used Mr. Hawthorne's seal. The room was very quiet. Robert Beaumont picked up the ledger. He read slowly. He was not a man who had been deceived easily. She could see that now, see the intelligence working behind his eyes as he read, the careful mind that had built a successful estate of his own, examining the figures and recognizing what they showed. He said it gap, he said. This is over a considerable period. 18 months, Clara said. Beginning the month, Mr. Hawthorne returned from the war and was occupied with his brother's estate transition. And Nathaniel himself discovered this. Nathaniel and I discovered it together. The initial indication came from my knowledge of the families affected. The documentation came from the estate records, which Mr. Hawthorne pulled himself. She met Robert Beaumont's eyes. He is not backing out of any agreement, sir. He is trying to understand what was done in his name, while he was trusting someone who did not deserve it. Robert Beaumont was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Eleanor. Did you know about this? I knew something was wrong, Eleanor said. I came to Miss Whitmore because she was the one who had gotten close enough to see it clearly. A pause. I also want to say something, Father, about the agreement. About the preliminary terms. Robert Beaumont looked at his daughter with the expression of a man who senses he is about to hear something he has been successfully avoided for quite some time. Carlyle was using the development plan as a way to increase the revenue clause, Eleanor said. He told you the Western land development would raise the settlement figures. He did not tell you that the development he was proposing would destroy a natural area with documented botanical significance, displace tenant families from their homes, and falsify the records to cover the associated costs. She was very calm. Very precise. He was using our agreement, the one you and Mr. Hawthorne Sr. made as a mechanism to serve his own profit. He positioned himself to benefit from the commission on both sides of the transaction. She paused. And I would like to say clearly, Father, that I have never wanted the agreement on those terms. I would like the chance to say so plainly for the first time, to your face. Robert Beaumont looked at his daughter for a long moment. Something passed through his expression, something complicated, the expression of a father confronted with the realization that his certainty about what was best for his child had perhaps never been tested against what his child actually wanted. Eleanor, he said. I am not saying I have objection to Nathaniel Hawthorne as a man, Eleanor said steadily. I am saying that an agreement made without my knowledge, tied to land development plans I was never told about, brokered in part by a man who was stealing from everyone involved, that is not an agreement I can consent to. Not as it stands. She looked at her father without apology and without unkindness. I think you know that. The silence was long. Robert Beaumont set Carlyle's letter aside. He looked at Clara's documents. He looked at his daughter. I will write to my solicitor tonight, he said finally. The preliminary terms are suspended until this situation is fully examined. He looked at Clara. Tell Nathaniel I want to meet with him this week. With full account documentation on both sides. Yes, sir, Clara said. And Miss Whitmore, he met her eyes. Your father was a man of good character. I knew him to be honest in every dealing I was aware of. I am sorry his letters were not answered. Clara held his gaze. She did not let herself feel that yet the particular shape of that acknowledgement, how much it meant, how long she had been carrying the weight of her father's unanswered letters. She would feel it later, when she was alone and there was time for it. Thank you, she said. She walked back toward the estate in the dark. She had not planned to. She had planned to go home, to tell her aunt, to sleep and return in the morning. But something pulled her back, the sense of something unfinished, a thread she had not yet tied off, an instinct that said there was one more thing she needed to do before the day ended. The estate gate was lit by a single lamp hung at the post. The gate itself was open. She noticed it every time now, the openness of it, the way it had been left that way since the morning she pushed through. Nathaniel was on the front steps when she came up the drive. He had been waiting. She did not comment on this. She simply walked up to where he stood and said, Robert Beaumont has suspended the preliminary terms and wants to meet with you this week. Carlyle's letter didn't land the way he planned. Nathaniel let out a slow breath. "Eleanor," he said. She told her father plainly that she didn't want the agreement on those terms. Clara paused. He listened. That took courage. She has a great deal of it. Clara looked at him. The agreement, Nathaniel. The marriage arrangement. You really didn't know the full terms. It was not quite a question. She asked it anyway. I knew the families had a long-standing understanding, he said. I did not know there were signed preliminary terms. I did not know Carlyle had witnessed them, and I did not know. He stopped. I did not know Eleanor had never been asked what she wanted. Now you do. He was quiet for a moment. Then I owe her an apology. You can tell her that yourself, Clara said. She'll appreciate it more from you than about you. He almost smiled again, that brief real thing that appeared occasionally and disappeared before it fully arrived. How did you do that, he said. Robert Beaumont is not a man who changes his position easily. I didn't change his position, she said. I showed him the actual documents and let him read them. His own honesty did the rest. She paused. People mostly want to do the right thing, Nathaniel. They just need to be shown clearly what the right thing is, without someone else's version of events getting in the way first. He looked at her. The lamplight from the gatepost fell between them, and the night was warm and close and full of the sounds of summer insects. Somewhere a creak, the particular deep silence of a large property at rest, and he was looking at her with the full, unguarded attention of a man who has stopped calculating and is simply seeing. Clara, he said. She held very still. What you've done in these 3 days, he said. The families, the valley. He stopped, started again. My father kept this land for 30 years, my brother for 10. I have been here for 18 months, and in that time I allowed more damage than either of them would have permitted in a decade. He looked at her steadily. You came through that gate 3 days ago with a notebook and your father's honesty, and you have done more for this land and the people on it than I have managed in a year and a half of ownership. She looked at him. Don't do that, she said quietly. Do what? Give me credit for what you did. Her voice was steady. I brought you the information. You're the one who chose to act on it. You're the one who rescinded the eviction notices and wrote to the magistrate and put Carlyle's records in front of Robert Beaumont's solicitor. She held his gaze. Don't make me into the story. You're the one who has to live on this land and answer for what's done here. That matters more than anything I've contributed. He was quiet. You're harder to thank than anyone I've ever met, he said. I'm not hard to thank, she said. I'm hard to flatter. Those are different things. He looked at her for a long moment. And then, for the first time, a real one, unhurried, complete, nothing brief or barely there about it, he smiled. It changed his face entirely. It made him look like someone she had not quite seen yet, someone younger and less burdened, someone who had been underneath all that careful control the whole time, just waiting for a sufficient reason to surface. She looked away first. I should go home, she said. Yes, he said, but he did not move, and neither did she, not immediately. The meeting with Beaumont, she said. I'll come. I was going to ask. I know, she picked up the satchel. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, he said. She walked down the drive toward the gate. She was nearly through it when he called after her. Clara. She turned. He was standing where she had left him, in the lamplight, and his expression was everything she did not yet have words for: gratitude, and something past gratitude, respect and something past respect. The beginning of something that had not been named, because naming it required more certainty than either of them had yet earned. Your father would be proud, he said. She held that for a moment. Let it go all the way down, to the place where she had been keeping 3 years of grief in careful storage. I know, she said. She walked home through the warm dark. Behind her, the gate to Hawthorne Estate stood open. It had not been closed once since the morning she pushed through it. She did not think it would be closed again. Carlyle came back. That was the thing none of them had fully prepared for. Clara was at the estate office the following morning, when the sound of hooves came up the drive, not the measured, unhurried cadence of a man returning from a routine errand, but something faster, more deliberate, with the particular energy of someone who has made a decision and is arriving to enforce it. Nathaniel heard it too. She watched him set down his pen. They looked at each other across the desk. "Stay here," he said. "Absolutely not," she said, and stood up. He did not argue. There was not time. Carlyle walked through the front door of the estate without knocking, which told Clara everything she needed to know about how he had always moved through this house. What kind of access he had made for himself over 18 months of careful positioning. He came down the corridor and pushed open the office door, and stopped when he saw them both. He was not disheveled. That was the first thing she noticed. A man who had ridden hard from Fredericksburg and made a decision to return should have looked like it tired, rushed, the edges showing. Carlyle looked composed. His coat was straight. His expression was the one she had seen in this room before, smooth, constructed, the face of a man who has already decided what version of events he is going to present. He looked at Clara, then he looked at Nathaniel. "I received your letter," he said to Nathaniel, as though Clara were not in the room. "I sent you to Fredericksburg," Nathaniel said. His voice was level, "not to a law firm in Richmond." A very brief pause. "I had business to attend to." "Whose business?" Carlyle's eyes moved to the documents on the desk, the account ledgers, the falsified records, the organized evidence that had been building for 4 days. Something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not quite. The rapid recalculation of a man who has walked into a room and found it arranged differently than he expected. "I see you've been reviewing the accounts," he said. "I have," Nathaniel said, with considerable interest. "Then you'll have found the irregularities I've been meaning to bring to your attention." He said it without hesitation, without a flicker of uncertainty, and Clara felt a cold, clear admiration for the sheer audacity of it. The man was going to claim he had found the irregularities himself. He was going to get ahead of it. "I've been aware for some time that the quarterly figures weren't reconciling correctly. I was preparing a full report," Clara said. "The gap begins in October 1815. Carlyle looked at her then, directly, with the flat, assessing attention he had been withholding since he walked in. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I don't believe your presence in this office is appropriate too. The gap begins in October 1815, she said. "Again, which is the month, Mr. Hawthorne returned from the war, and the estate management was placed entirely in your hands. The amounts are consistent, never large enough in any single quarter to trigger immediate alarm, but adding to a sum over 18 months that is considerably more than a clerical error." She held his gaze. "The irregularities you were preparing to report." His jaw tightened, just slightly, the first crack in the composure. "You have no authority here," he said. "Mr. Hawthorne gave me authority here 4 days ago," she said, "when he asked me to help him understand what had been happening on his estate. I've been understanding it quite clearly." Carlyle turned to Nathaniel. He dropped the smooth performance like a coat he no longer needed. Underneath it was something harder, not rage, but the cold, purposeful resolve of a man who has played a long game and is not ready to concede it. "You're going to listen to a tenant's daughter over someone who has managed this estate for 3 years?" he said. "I'm going to look at account ledgers," Nathaniel said, "which don't care whose daughter anyone is. Those documents have been selectively presented to you, taken out of context. She has a personal grievance, her family's tenancy, the eviction notice. Her family's tenancy account shows no delinquency," Nathaniel said, "as do the accounts of every family who received a notice in my name. The cause cited on those notices is false. You falsified it." He stood. "That is not context. That is a fact." Silence. Carlyle looked at Nathaniel for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara. She could see him thinking, could see the rapid, careful assessment of a man who is deciding how much ground he has lost and where he still has footing. "The Beaumont agreement," he said, quietly, deliberately. "You break this arrangement with Robert Beaumont, Nathaniel, and you lose more than a land deal. Your family's reputation in this county has been built on reliable partnerships. Your father's word was his bond. If you withdraw from a signed preliminary agreement over," he gestured at Clara, Over an inventory of weeds and some disputed accounting. You will not recover from it. The room was very still. Clara kept her eyes on Nathaniel. She watched him stand at the desk with Carlyle's threat hanging in the air between them, the threat of reputation, of standing, of everything a man in his position had built his life upon and could not easily afford to lose. She watched him consider it, and then she watched him set it down. "Get out of this house," Nathaniel said. Carlyle blinked. "I beg you falsified records. You stole from this estate. You put families out of their homes in my name with forged cause. You used my seal and my absence and my trust to build something that served only yourself." Nathaniel's voice did not rise. "It became quieter, which was worse, and you walked back through my front door this morning and tried to do it again to my face." He looked at Carlyle with the full, clear attention of a man who is completely certain. "Get out." Carlyle stood very still for a moment. Then he said, "You'll regret this." "Probably," Nathaniel said. "Get out anyway." He was gone within the hour. Not quietly, he collected what he could from his quarters, made 2 trips to the stable, said something to the head groom that Clara did not hear, but that made the groom go pale and look away. Then he rode out through the front gate, not south this time, not running, but with the hard, deliberate pace of a man who has not yet finished. Clara watched him go from the office window. "He's going to Robert Beaumont," she said. "Yes," Nathaniel said. He was beside her. "He has nowhere else to go with it. Beaumont is the only leverage he has left. Then we need to get there first." "Clara." He put his hand briefly on her arm, just for a moment, a touch of restraint, of something more careful than urgency. "Robert Beaumont is meeting us tomorrow. We already have his word." "Carlyle doesn't know that." "No," Nathaniel said. "He doesn't." She turned from the window. "Let him go to Beaumont. Let him make his case, and let Robert Beaumont tell him that the preliminary terms are suspended and that he has already seen the account records." She met his eyes. "Carlyle walks into a room expecting leverage and finds none. That's better than anything we could arrange." Nathaniel looked at her. "You've been thinking 3 moves ahead this entire time," he said. "I've been thinking about what my father would have done," she said. "He was a man who understood that you cannot force the truth on anyone. You can only clear the ground so they can find it themselves." Something moved through Nathaniel's expression, that thing she still did not have a clean name for. That had been building over 4 days of shared work and shared risk, and the particular intimacy of people who have sat together in a difficult room and not looked away from what was in it. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The meeting with Robert Beaumont happened the following morning, and it did not go the way any of them had planned, which was because Carlyle had gotten there first. Not to Robert Beaumont, to Robert Beaumont's solicitor. Clara learned this when she and Nathaniel arrived at the Beaumont house at 9 o'clock and were met at the door not by Eleanor, but by a man she did not recognize, middle-aged, carrying a leather case, with the tight, careful expression of someone who has been given unpleasant instructions and intends to execute them. "Mr. Hawthorne," the man said, "I am Jonathan Hale, of Hale and Merritt, Richmond. I represent the Beaumont family in matters pertaining to the preliminary land agreement." He looked at Clara. "I was not informed this meeting would include additional parties." "Miss Whitmore is here at my request," Nathaniel said. "The terms of the preliminary agreement are between the Hawthorne and Beaumont families," Hale said. "I must ask that she stays," Nathaniel said. Flatly, not a discussion. Hale looked at him for a moment. Then he stepped back from the door. Robert Beaumont was in the sitting room. He was standing, not sitting. Clara noticed this, noticed the difference from the man she had seen at dinner 2 nights ago, who had been composed and in control of his own home. Today he looked like a man who had been awake most of the night, and who had received information that had rearranged something fundamental about how he understood a situation. Eleanor was not in the room. That was the second thing Clara noticed, and it alarmed her more than the solicitor. "Robert," Nathaniel said, "where is Eleanor?" "Sit down, Nathaniel," Robert Beaumont said. "Where is Eleanor?" "She is in her room. She is fine." "Sit down." He waited until they were seated before he sat himself, the solicitor taking a chair to the side in the particular way of men who are present as witnesses rather than participants. "Carlyle came here last night." "I know," Nathaniel said. "What did he tell you?" "He told me a great many things. Some of which I believe and some of which I do not." Robert Beaumont looked at Clara. "He told me that Miss Whitmore has been working to undermine the land agreement from the beginning. That her access to the estate was obtained under false pretenses. That the account records she presented to me were selectively assembled to support a specific conclusion." Clara kept her face even. "And do you believe that?" "I believe," Robert Beaumont said carefully, "that the account records you showed me are genuine. I had my own man look at them last night. He confirms the gap is real and the pattern is consistent with deliberate manipulation." He paused. "I do not believe you fabricated them. What I am less certain about is whether there is a larger picture I am not seeing." "What larger picture?" Nathaniel said. Robert Beaumont looked at him steadily. "Carlyle says that your intention has always been to void the preliminary agreement. That you asked Miss Whitmore to help you build a case against him, specifically because removing him removes the witness to the signed terms. That the entire review of the accounts was designed to create grounds to break the contract without penalty." The room was very quiet. Clara looked at Nathaniel. She watched him absorb it, the specific, elegant cruelty of it, the way Carlyle had taken the truth and bent it just enough to make it unrecognizable. Because the elements were all real. Nathaniel had reviewed the accounts. She had helped him. Carlyle had been the witness. The facts were there. Carlyle had simply connected them differently. "Robert," Nathaniel said, "look at me." Robert Beaumont looked at him. "I did not know the full terms of the preliminary agreement until 4 days ago," Nathaniel said. "I did not know Carlyle had witnessed the signing. I did not ask Miss Whitmore to help me build a case against him. She came to me, through my gate, because a survey crew was about to destroy a natural valley that her father spent 4 years trying to protect. And no one with the authority to stop it knew it existed." He paused. "I have been reviewing the accounts because they needed to be reviewed. Not to void your agreement, because Hawthorne Estate has been managed dishonestly for 18 months, and families who should not have been threatened have been threatened in my name." Robert Beaumont was quiet for a long moment. "The agreement," he said. "The preliminary terms. What is your intention regarding them?" Nathaniel did not hesitate. "I intend to discuss them honestly. With you. Without Carlyle in the room, without a revenue clause tied to development plans I never approved, and without my daughter, your daughter, being treated as a line item in a land negotiation." He met Robert Beaumont's eyes. "That is my intention." Something shifted in Robert Beaumont's expression. Clara said quietly, "Mr. Beaumont, may I speak plainly?" He looked at her. "You have so far, Miss Whitmore." "Carlyle came here last night because he has nothing else," she said. "The account records are genuine. Your man confirmed it. The eviction notices were falsified. The original payment records prove it. The survey of the valley was unauthorized. There is no instruction from Mr. Hawthorne in the estate files ordering it." She kept her voice even. "He built something in this county over 18 months that served only himself, and he used every relationship around him as a tool to build it. Your agreement, Mr. Hawthorne's seal, the families on the estate. The land itself." She paused. "He came here last night because you are the last tool he has access to. He is asking you to believe that Mr. Hawthorne is the dishonest party, because if you believe that, it creates enough confusion to protect him." She looked at Robert Beaumont directly. "You are an honest man. He is counting on that honesty to work against your judgment." The solicitor shifted in his chair. Robert Beaumont looked at him, then looked back at Clara. "You are quite remarkable, Miss Whitmore," he said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was the observations of a man recalibrating in real time. "My father taught me to look at facts," she said, "not at the story someone builds around them." A long pause. Then Robert Beaumont said, "Jonathan, step outside, please." The solicitor left without argument. Robert Beaumont stood and walked to the door of the room and called up the stairs. "Eleanor, come down, please." Eleanor came down with the careful composure of a woman who has been listening from the top of the stairs and has decided how she intends to enter the room she has been excluded from. She sat beside Clara without being asked. Robert Beaumont sat across from both of them and looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he looked at Nathaniel. "I owe you both an apology," he said. "I allowed a man I trusted too easily to become too involved in the arrangements of this family. The preliminary terms, the revenue clause, the development conditions, I approved them because Carlyle presented them as beneficial, and I did not look closely enough at what they required." He looked at Eleanor. "And I did not ask you what you wanted. That is the thing I am most sorry for." Eleanor held her father's gaze. "I know, Father, I would like to ask now," he said it simply. Without defense, "What do you want?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Clara watched her decide how much honesty to use, and then watched her decide to use all of it. "I want the agreement dissolved, as written," Eleanor said. "Not because I have any objection to Nathaniel as a man or a neighbor, but because I will not be a term in a land contract." She paused. "If there is to be any future conversation about any kind of arrangement between these families, it will happen between the people it concerns, not between their fathers and their land managers." She looked at her father steadily. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Yes," Robert Beaumont said. He looked slightly diminished, not broken, but reduced to his actual size, which was a better size than the one he had been occupying. "I understand." He looked at Nathaniel. "The preliminary terms are dissolved. Formally, in writing, today. Whatever conversation should happen next about the land boundary, about anything else, we have it directly." Nathaniel nodded. "That is all I've wanted," Robert Beaumont said. "What are you going to do about Carlyle?" "The county magistrate is already involved," Nathaniel said. "The account irregularities constitute theft. The falsified eviction notices constitute fraud. I'll be filing formal documentation this week." He paused. "He rode south from here. He won't be difficult to find a man on the run with no money of his own, because everything he took from an estate account." Robert Beaumont nodded slowly. "If there is anything the Beaumont family can provide documentation of his representations to us, records of the meetings, you have it." "Thank you," Nathaniel said. They sat for a moment in the particular quiet of people who have said the difficult things and are now on the other side of them. Then Clara said, "Mr. Beaumont, the valley on the Hawthorne Estate. The natural area Carlyle planned to drain." Robert Beaumont looked at her. "What about it?" "The boundary between the Hawthorne and Beaumont properties runs along the eastern edge of the valley," she said. "The spring that feeds it originates on land that is technically shared boundary." She opened her notebook. She brought it. She always brought it, and set a carefully drawn map on the table. "I've been documenting the plant life there for 2 years. There are species here that may be entirely unique to this location. The Philadelphia Botanical Society has expressed interest in a full documentation." She looked at him steadily. "I'm asking if the Beaumont family would be willing to formally acknowledge the valley as protected land. Not sold, not developed. On both sides of the boundary." Robert Beaumont looked at the map. He looked at his daughter. He looked at Nathaniel. "Is this what you want?" he asked Nathaniel. "It's what the land needs," Nathaniel said. "And yes, it's what I want." Robert Beaumont looked at the map for another long moment. "Draw up the terms," he said to Clara. "I'll have my solicitor review them." She almost said, "I'm not a solicitor," but she looked at him and understood that this was not what he meant. He was not asking her to write legal language. He was asking her to write the truth of what the valley was and what it needed, and he would have someone else translate it into legal language afterward. She nodded. "I'll have something to you by the end of the week." They rode back to the estate in the late morning, and for a long stretch neither of them spoke. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of people who have been through something together, and are still in the aftermath of it, still feeling the shape of it settle. "You brought the map," Nathaniel said eventually. "I brought it to the Beaumont dinner 2 nights ago," Clara said. "I thought there might be a moment for it. There wasn't. You've been carrying that in your notebook this whole time." "The valley was always the point," she said. Everything else, the accounts, the evictions, Carlisle, that all needed to be resolved. But the valley was why I came through the gate in the first place. I wasn't going to forget it. He looked at her. No, he said quietly. I don't imagine you would. They came through the gate open, still open, as it had been for 5 days now, and stopped in the drive. The mid-morning air was warm and full of the smell of summer grass and something floral coming from the direction of the old orchard, and somewhere in the back acreage the spring was running in its quiet, continuous way. The way it had been running before any of them existed, and the way it would run after. What happens now? Clara said. She meant it practically: the magistrate, the documentation, the formal filing. She meant it about the estate, the families, the restoration of the accounts. She meant it about all of it, but Nathaniel answered differently. I'd like you to keep coming, he said, to the valley. To the office, to wherever this work takes you. He paused. Not because I need someone to review the accounts. I can hire someone for that. He looked at her directly. Because this estate needs someone who sees it the way your father saw it. The way you see it. Someone who understands that what's here is worth more than what it can be sold for. He stopped. And because I am a better man when you are in this building than when you are not, and I am not prepared to pretend otherwise. Clara was quiet. She looked at the gate, at the long drive, at the oaks that had been standing since before either of them was born, and would be standing long after. She thought about everything she was not yet ready to say, and everything she did not need to say yet, and she thought about her father's voice coming off those pages in the filing cabinet. All that faithful attention poured into something that would not answer back. She thought about how it felt to have someone answer. I have a botanical documentation to complete, she said, and terms for a land protection agreement to draft, and 4 families to inform that their homes are theirs. She looked at him. I'll be here at 7. He held her gaze. I'll have the lamp lit. She walked toward the house, notebook under her arm, and behind her she heard him follow, and the gate stood open at the end of the drive, and the summer morning was warm and wide, and full of things that were still growing. Everything Carlisle had tried to take was still there. Everything her father had worked to protect was still there. And she was still there. That was enough. For now it was more than enough. The magistrate's formal findings arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Carlisle rode south for the last time. Clara was in the valley when Nathaniel came to find her. She heard him before she saw him, the familiar cadence of his boots on the dry summer grass, unhurried but purposeful, the walk of a man who has learned that the valley requires a certain kind of approach, a slowing down, a willingness to arrive rather than simply appear. She had noticed him learning that. She had not told him she noticed. She was on her knees beside the northwest corner, finally completing the documentation of the 2 unidentified specimens that had resisted her for 2 years. She had written to a botanist in Philadelphia named Dr. Harlan Reed 3 weeks prior, enclosing pressed samples and her most detailed sketches, and his response had arrived yesterday with a confirmation that made her hand shake slightly when she read it. Both specimens were previously undocumented varieties, one almost certainly a new classification, and the Botanical Society wished to publish her documentation in their annual record under her name. She had not told Nathaniel that yet either. She was still deciding how to hold it. It was too large to carry casually, and too important to announce without the right moment. The magistrate ruled, Nathaniel said, stopping a few feet behind her. She did not look up from the specimen immediately. In our favor. Entirely. He crouched down beside her, which he did sometimes now, came into the valley and crouched beside whatever she was working on, and looked at it with the careful attention of a man who has learned to see what he is looking at. Carlisle was found in Culpeper County 4 days ago. The magistrate's findings confirmed theft, fraud, and falsification of legal documents. The county court date is set for September. The families, she said. The eviction notices are formally voided on record. The Maddox family, the Picketts, the Harrows, the Baines, all reinstated, all accounts corrected, and the estate owes each family a formal restitution for the distress caused. He paused. I'm delivering those letters personally, this week." Clara set down her pencil. She looked at the specimen in front of her, the small, quietly persistent plant that had grown in this exact spot for longer than anyone in Willow Creek had been alive, in soil that was exactly right. Beside a spring that ran at exactly the right rate, asking nothing from anyone except to be left in peace. "Your father's name is on the record," Nathaniel said. "The magistrate's findings cite the original correspondence as foundational evidence." George Whitmore's letters. He paused. "His name is in the official county record as the first person to document and report the mismanagement of this estate's natural resources." Clara was very still. She had not known he had done that. She had not known he had gone to the magistrate and made sure of it. She had not asked him to. He had done it because it was true and because it was right, and because he was the kind of man she was learning this, piece by piece. With the same careful attention she gave to everything worth understanding, who did not let true things go unacknowledged, simply because no one was watching. She pressed her hand flat against the earth beside the specimen. She did not trust her voice for a moment. "Thank you," she said. Quietly, "It's his record," Nathaniel said. "I only made sure it was in the right place." She picked up her pencil. Her hand was steady. "The Botanical Society wants to publish the documentation." A pause. "What?" Dr. Reed in Philadelphia. She kept her eyes on the specimen. He confirmed both unidentified varieties. One is a new classification. "They want to publish the full documentation in the annual record." She paused. "Under my name." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. She heard him breathe. He said, "It will include Father's original observations," she said. "I wrote them in as historical record, his seasonal notes, his identification of the valley's significance. He'll be cited." She looked up then, met his eyes. "Both of us will." He looked at her for a long moment with that complete unguarded attention that she had stopped trying to look away from. "George Whitmore spent 19 years on this land," he said. "And now his name will be in a publication that botanists will reference for 100 years. And yours beside it." "Yes." He held her gaze. And she watched something move through his expression, not the brief, contained almost smile she had catalogued over the past weeks, but something fuller, something that had been waiting for the right size of moment to match it. Pride, she thought. Genuine, uncomplicated pride in her, not for himself, not because her success reflected on him, but because he had watched her work and knew what it had cost and knew what it was worth. Nobody had looked at her work that way before. She looked back at the specimen. "I need 20 more minutes here," she said. "I'll wait," he said. He sat down in the grass beside her and waited, and the summer morning moved around them both, and she worked, and he was quiet in the way of someone who has learned that her silence is not absence, but concentration. And the valley held them the same way it held everything, without preference, without condition, simply open. The Pickett family was the first one Nathaniel visited. Clara came with him. He had not asked her to, and she had not announced she was coming. She had simply been at the estate gate at 8 o'clock when he brought the horses around, and he had looked at her and handed her the reins of the second horse without a word. Thomas Pickett opened his door and looked at Nathaniel Hawthorne standing on his porch for what was probably the first time in 11 years of tenancy, and his expression went through several things in rapid succession: wariness, confusion, a careful blankness that Clara recognized as the face a man puts on when he does not know yet whether what is coming is good or bad and cannot afford to be wrong about it. "Mr. Hawthorne," Thomas said. "Mr. Pickett." Nathaniel held out the letter, not handed it over, held it out in the way of someone offering rather than delivering. "I'd like you to read this, and I'd like to say before you do that the notice you received in November was false. The cause cited was fabricated. Your account has been in good standing for 11 years, and I know it, and that notice should never have been sent, and I am sorry that it was." Thomas Pickett looked at the letter in Nathaniel's hand. He looked at Nathaniel's face. He looked at Clara, who was standing slightly behind and to the side in the way of someone who is present as a witness rather than a principal. He took the letter. He read it on the porch, standing, and Clara watched his hands. They were still at first, and then they were not a slight tremor, just in the fingers. The kind of tremor that is not weakness, but the physical expression of something too large to contain entirely. When he finished reading, he lowered the letter and stood for a moment looking at the yard, the fence line he had built himself 15 years ago, and maintained every spring since. "My wife," he said. His voice was rough. "She's been afraid to plant the autumn garden. Didn't see the point if we were—" He stopped. "I should go tell her." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "You should." Thomas Pickett looked at him directly, with the particular look of a man who has been wronged and knows it, and is deciding in real time how to carry the fact that the wrong is being acknowledged. "You've got your father's face," Thomas said. "He used to come out himself, too, when something needed saying." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "I've been told that. He was a fair man." Thomas looked down at the letter. "I reckon you aim to be the same." "I'm working on it," Nathaniel said. Thomas Pickett nodded once. Then he went inside to tell his wife she could plant the autumn garden. Clara and Nathaniel stood on the porch for a moment in the warm morning air, not saying anything, and Clara thought about all the mornings Thomas Pickett's wife had woken up not knowing whether the home around her would still be hers. And she thought about Ellen Harrow's 4-month-old, and she thought about what it meant, what it actually, concretely meant for Nathaniel to be standing on this porch instead of sending another letter through another manager. "3 more today," she said. "3 more," he said. They went. It was at the Harrow house that the first real trouble arrived, and it arrived in the shape of a woman named Agnes Beaumont, Robert Beaumont's sister, 60 years old, who had lived her entire life as the keeper of her family's social reputation, and who had strong and frequently expressed opinions about what was appropriate and what was not. Clara and Nathaniel came around the corner of the Harrow property path and found Agnes Beaumont standing at the gate talking to Ellen Harrow, and the conversation had the quality of something that had been going on for a while and was not going well. Agnes saw Nathaniel, and her expression shifted toward something composed and cold and deliberate. She saw Clara, and her expression shifted further. "Nathaniel," she said. "What a coincidence." "Agnes," he said. "Good morning. I was just speaking with Mrs. Harrow about the situation." Agnes looked at Clara with the particular attention of a woman who has already decided what she thinks and is confirming it. "I understand you've been spending considerable time at the estate, Miss Whitmore." "I have," Clara said, "with Mr. Hawthorne. Without a chaperone, I'm told." "I've been working," Clara said, "on the estate accounts and the botanical documentation. Mr. Hawthorne's housekeeper has been present in the house at all times." "The housekeeper," Agnes said, in a tone that conveyed exactly what she thought of that. Ellen Harrow was standing at her own gate, looking between them with the expression of a woman who has had quite enough difficulty in the past several months and was not enthusiastic about hosting more on her property. "Agnes," Nathaniel said. His voice was pleasant, utterly inflexible. "Miss Whitmore has done more for the families on this estate in the past 3 weeks than I managed in 18 months. She identified fraud that would have gone undetected. She secured the protection of a natural area of documented scientific significance. She helped me understand what was happening on my own land." He paused. "I don't particularly care what the county thinks about where she spends her time." Agnes stared at him. "Your mother," she said, "would have something to say about." "My mother has been in Richmond for 6 months and has not sent a single letter inquiring about the welfare of any of the tenant families," Nathaniel said. "When she returns and wishes to discuss propriety, I'll listen to what she has to say. Until then, I have 3 letters to deliver." He looked at Ellen Harrow. "Mrs. Harrow." Agnes Beaumont was left at the gate. Clara did not look at her as she passed through. She felt the woman's eyes on her back sharp, assessing, the gaze of some filing information for later use. She kept her chin level and her pace even. Inside, Ellen Harrow read her letter at the kitchen table with her baby on her knee, and when she finished, she pressed the letter flat against the table with her palm and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then looked at Clara. "You did this," she said. "Not a question. Mr. Hawthorne did this," Clara said. "But you started it." Ellen looked at her steadily. Jesse Maddox told my husband, "You walked through that gate with nothing but a notebook." "I walked through with a good deal of anger too," Clara said. Though I tried to keep that separate, Ellen almost smiled. It was the first time Clara had seen Ellen Harrow's face do anything approaching ease in months. "Your father would be." "People keep saying that," Clara said gently. "I hope they're right." "They are," Ellen said with certainty. George Whitmore was the most quietly determined person in this village. "You've got every bit of it." She looked at Nathaniel. "Both of you sit down. I'm making coffee." It was not a suggestion. They sat down. The news about Agnes Beaumont's commentary traveled the way news always traveled in Willow Creek, faster than seemed physically possible, reaching people who had no obvious connection to the original conversation and arriving in forms that had been altered by passage through multiple tellings. By Thursday, the story, as Clara heard it from her aunt, was that she had been seen at the estate at all hours, had been given a room there, was being kept as some kind of personal secretary, and had been spotted in Nathaniel Hawthorne's company in 3 separate locations in 2 days without any appropriate escort. Margaret heard all of this and brought it to Clara Thursday evening with the careful expression of a woman who wants to say something difficult and is trying to find the least damaging angle of approach. "People are talking," Margaret said. "Let them," Clara said. "Clara, Aunt Margaret. Thomas Pickett's wife planted her autumn garden this week. Ellen Harrow's family is safe. The Maddox children are not going to be put out into the road." She looked at her aunt. "If the cost of that is that Agnes Beaumont has opinions about my whereabouts, I find I can live with it." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "And Nathaniel Hawthorne himself?" Clara looked at the table. "He's a good man," she said. "He was a failing one when I met him. He's correcting it." "That is not was quiet, Clara." Margaret's voice was gentler now. "I am not Agnes Beaumont. I am not asking because of what people say. I am asking because I know your face, and I have known it for 24 years, and I can see when something has changed in it." She waited. "Has something changed?" Clara looked at her aunt. She thought about the valley, and Nathaniel sitting in the grass while she worked. She thought about the picket porch and 3 more letters, and the way he had looked at Agnes Beaumont, that pleasant, inflexible certainty. She thought about the lamp he said he would have lit at 7 o'clock, and that was lit every morning when she arrived. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I think something is changing. I don't know what it becomes." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "Be sure," she said finally, "whatever it becomes. Be sure it's what you want, and not just what's in front of you." "I know the difference," Clara said. "I know you do." Margaret reached across the table and put her hand over Clara's for just a moment. "Your father was sure of me for 6 years before he said a word about it." "You don't have to rush." Clara looked at her aunt's hand. 6 years, she said. "He was thorough," Margaret said, with the particular tone of a woman who had found this both frustrating and endearing. "It's family trait, apparently." Clara laughed. It came out of her suddenly and completely, the first full laugh she had produced in as long as she could clearly remember, and Margaret smiled at the sound of it, like a woman hearing something return that she had been quietly worried about. The twist came on a Friday morning, and it came from a direction none of them had looked. Clara arrived at the estate at 7 o'clock and found Nathaniel not at the desk but in the corridor, standing with a letter in his hand and an expression she had not seen before, not anger. Not the controlled processing she had learned to read over the past weeks, but something that looked, at its edges, like genuine shock. "What is it?" she said immediately. He handed her the letter. It was from his mother, from Richmond. 2 pages in a precise formal hand that conveyed its emotional content entirely through what it did not say directly. She read it. The first page was about the estate his mother had heard, through connections in the county, about the situation with Carlyle, about the magistrate's findings, about the formal proceedings. She expressed appropriate concern and appropriate approval of the resolution. The second page was about Clara, not unkindly. That was the thing that made it more difficult, not less. There was no cruelty in it, no dismissal, Nathaniel's mother wrote about Clara with the careful, measured language of a woman who understood that she was addressing something significant and wished to address it thoughtfully. I have heard a great deal about Miss Whitmore's contributions to the matter, and I do not doubt her capability or her character. I write only to ask you to consider the position carefully. The county will forgive a great many things. It will not easily forgive a formal arrangement that crosses the lines your father's family spent 60 years establishing. I say this not because I believe Miss Whitmore to be unworthy. I say it because I love you, and because the world is what it is and not what we wish it were. Clara read it twice, then she set it on the desk. She was quiet for a moment. She's not wrong, she said. About the county, I know, Nathaniel said. Agnes Beaumont is the beginning, not the end. If this continues, whatever this is, there will be more of it. People who remember your father's name and what it stood for, in terms of who was appropriate and who wasn't. People who will make it difficult for you, for your standing, your business, your relationships in this county. I know, he said again, and he looked at her. And I want you to know that I know it. Clearly, without pretending it isn't real. He crossed to the desk and stood on the other side of it from her. I am not going to tell you it won't matter. It will matter. People will have opinions, and some of them will act on those opinions in ways that cause difficulty. He held her gaze. I am also not going to let that be the thing that decides this. Nathaniel, my mother is right that the world is what it is, he said. She is wrong that it cannot be changed by the way people inside it choose to act. He paused. Your father changed this estate. From the outside, from a position that had no formal power, with nothing but attention and honesty and care. He changed it. His voice was completely steady. I am not going to tell a man like that's daughter that the county's opinion of her family name outweighs what I know about who she is. Clara looked at him. She thought about what her aunt had said. Be sure it's what you want, and not just what's in front of you. She was sure. She had been sure for longer than she had admitted, even to herself. Your mother will want to meet me, she said. Yes, he said. And that meeting will be significant. Yes, and Agnes Beaumont will have a great deal to say. Agnes Beaumont has a great deal to say about everything, he said. She has opinions about the way the post road was repaired last spring. I survive it. Clara looked at the letter on the desk. Then she looked at him. I'm not interested in becoming a lady of the estate, she said. I'm not interested in giving up the documentation or the botanical work or my own name on my own record. I'm not interested in becoming smaller to fit a different shape. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to. What are you asking? He was quiet for a moment. Not uncertain, she could see the difference now between the silence of a man who doesn't know and the silence of a man who is choosing his words with the care they deserve. I am asking, he said, if you would be willing to find out what this becomes. With me, not quickly, not without full knowledge of what it costs. He held her gaze. I am asking if George Whitmore's daughter, who walked through my gate with a notebook and changed everything she touched, would be willing to keep walking. The office was very quiet. Outside, the summer morning was going about its business, the birds, the distant sound of the estate coming alive, somewhere the spring running in the valley, the same as it had always run. Yes, Clara said, just that, just the word, said the way she said everything that mattered plainly, without decoration, with the full weight of her meaning behind it. Nathaniel breathed. All right, he said, and they went back to work. The county hearing for Carlyle's case was held on a Wednesday in September, and Clara sat in the front row with Thomas Pickett on one side of her and Ellen Harrow on the other, and the full account of what had been done, the falsified records, the stolen income, the fraudulent eviction notices, the unauthorized survey was read into the official record of Shenandoah County, Virginia, in the year 1817. Nathaniel testified for 40 minutes. He was precise, thorough, and entirely without theatrics. He gave the facts in the order they had uncovered them, cited the documents by date, and named every family who had been affected with the same specificity he gave to the account figures. When he was done, the magistrate asked if anyone else wished to speak. Clara stood. She heard the murmur in the room. She had expected it. She had dressed carefully for this, not in a way that was trying to be something she wasn't, but in a way that said clearly, "I am here and I am not apologizing for it." She testified for 25 minutes. She spoke about her father's letters. She spoke about the valley and its documented botanical significance. She spoke about the survey stakes she had pulled from the ground and about the account gaps she had helped identify, and about the 4 families who had spent months afraid of losing their homes. She held the room's attention completely, not because she performed. Because she told the truth, and the truth was interesting, and the room was full of people who lived on land and understood what it meant when the land was not managed honestly. When she finished, there was a silence. And then Thomas Pickett said, quietly and clearly, from the front row, "That's right," and Ellen Harrow said every word. And 2 other voices from the back of the room confirmed it, and the magistrate let them, because some things are important enough to let stand in the record without interruption. Carlyle was convicted on 3 counts. He received a sentence that the county solicitor called appropriate, and that Thomas Pickett called light, and that Clara called the legal system functioning within its limits, which was better than the alternative. Outside the courthouse, in the September air that had finally broken from summer into something cooler and cleaner, Robert Beaumont found Clara and Nathaniel. He shook Nathaniel's hand. Then he turned to Clara and held out his hand to her, and she shook it. And he said, "Your father would have been in that room today if he'd lived to see it. I want you to know that." "I know," she said. Eleanor appeared at her father's shoulder. She had been in the courthouse. Clara had seen her in the 3rd row, composed and attentive throughout. She looked at Clara now with the expression of a woman who has been watching something unfold, and is satisfied with how it has gone. "The botanical documentation," Eleanor said. "When does it publish?" "Spring," Clara said. "Dr. Reed says the spring edition." "I'd like a copy," Eleanor said. "You'll have the first one," Clara said. Eleanor smiled. It was a real smile, warm, uncomplicated, the smile of a woman who has said the difficult things that needed saying to the people who needed to hear them, and has come out the other side of it with her integrity intact. "I'm glad you pushed through that gate," she said. "So am I," Clara said. October came and the valley changed with it, the way the valley always changed with the season, slowly, and then all at once. The grasses going gold, the spring running clear and cold. The leaves of the documented specimens shifting through their autumn colors. Clara went to the valley every morning, sometimes alone, sometimes with Nathaniel beside her, sometimes with her notebook full and her pencil worn to a stub and her hands cold from the October air, and the particular deep satisfaction of a woman doing the work she was meant to do, in the place she was meant to do it. She finished the full botanical documentation in the 3rd week of October. She sat at the desk in the estate office, her desk now, in the practical sense, the one she had occupied every morning for 3 months. And she bound the pages together and wrote the title page in her clearest hand. A botanical documentation of the natural valley of Hawthorne Estate, Willow Creek, Virginia. Compiled by Clara Whitmore, with reference to the original seasonal observations of George Whitmore, 1814. She looked at her father's name on the page. She sat with it for a moment. She had carried his voice for 3 years in the valley, in the letters, in the words she used when she needed to say the true thing without flinching. She had carried it the way you carry something that was given to you before you knew its full value, and now she knew its full value, and the carrying felt different. Not lighter, more deliberate. She closed the bound document. Nathaniel came in from the corridor and stopped when he saw her face. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. He crossed to the desk and looked at the title page. He read her father's name. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to the valley. Come with me." The valley in October was a different place than the valley in summer, not lesser, but changed, the way everything changes and remains itself at the same time. The spring ran cold and bright. The grasses had gone to their autumn gold. The mountain spurge had finished its last blooming and stood quiet, waiting for spring, trusting the valley to hold it through the winter the way it had held it through every winter before. They stood at the edge of the spring. "I used to ride past this part of the property without stopping," Nathaniel said. "For 18 months. I never came back here, I know," Clara said. "I didn't know what was here. You know now." He looked at the spring. "I owe this place an apology." She looked at him. "You're here now," she said. "That's the apology. The showing up is the apology." He turned to look at her. In the October light, he looked like himself, not the man on the dark horse who had first asked her name with cold eyes and the bearing of someone used to being the final word. Not the man bent over falsified records with his jaw tight and his anger turned inward. Just himself, the man who had learned to sit in the grass while she worked, and who delivered letters personally to people who deserved better than the ones they had received, and who had stood at Agnes Beaumont's certainty and not moved an inch. "I want to build something here," he said. She looked at him carefully. "What kind of something? Something that lasts?" He held her gaze. "The valley protected, the family secure, the estate managed honestly." He paused. "And you, here, as whatever you choose to be, not my secretary, not a decoration, not a concession to the county's expectations. You, with your name on your work and your work meaning what you need it to mean." He stopped. "I am not asking you to become part of this estate. I am asking if you would be willing to let this estate become part of what you build." Clara looked at the spring. She thought about her father, who had worked this land for 19 years and never once been offered the thing that was being offered to her now. She thought about the letters, filed and forgotten. She thought about the morning she pressed her palms against the iron gate and felt every warning she had ever been given pressed back and pushed anyway. She thought about what it meant to push through a gate and find something on the other side that was real. "Yes," she said, for the second time, with the same weight behind it as the first. Nathaniel reached out and took her hand, not dramatically. Not with ceremony, simply reached out and took it, the way you take hold of something you intend to keep carefully, and without letting go. They stood at the edge of the spring in the October light, and the valley held them the same way it held the water, and the mountain spurge, and the documented species, and the seasonal memory of everything that had grown here, and would grow. Here still, without preference, without condition. Simply open. The Spring Botanical Record published in March of 1818. The Botanical Society of Philadelphia sent Clara 12 copies, which arrived on a Tuesday in a parcel wrapped in brown paper that she opened at the kitchen table with her Aunt Margaret sitting across from her. Margaret held one of the copies and looked at the title page for a long time. She looked at George Whitmore's name in print. She set the copy down flat on the table and pressed both hands against it and did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "He would have been insufferably proud." "Yes," Clara said. "He would have shown every person in Willow Creek. He would have stood at the market and read sections aloud. He would have sent a copy to the lending library and made sure everyone knew it came from him." "Yes," Clara said, laughing now, the full clear laugh that had been coming more easily these past months. "He absolutely would have." Margaret looked at her niece across the table. At the woman Clara had become not just since the gate, though the gate mattered, but over 24 years of watching her father work and inheriting his attention, his honesty, his refusal to look away from the things that needed looking at. "Are you happy?" Margaret asked. Clara looked at the publication. At her father's name, at her own name beside it. She looked at the letter on the table from Nathaniel, who had been in Richmond for the week managing the formal estate restructuring with the new solicitor he had hired, who wrote every other day, because he said he thought better when he was writing to someone who would tell him clearly if he was thinking wrong. She looked at the window, through which, on a clear day, she could see the gate of Hawthorne Estate, from the kitchen table open, as it had been since July, as she believed it would remain. "Yes," she said, "I am." Margaret nodded once, the nod of a woman who has been carrying a concern for a long time and has now set it down. "Good," she said, "then everything else will follow." The gate of Hawthorne Estate was never closed again. Not in the months that followed, not in the years. Not when Nathaniel's mother came from Richmond in the spring and met Clara in the valley with an expression that moved, over the course of an afternoon, from careful reserve to something much closer to respect. Not when the county solicitor recorded the formal land protection agreement, signed by both the Hawthorne and Beaumont estates, designating the valley as preserved in perpetuity. Not when Eleanor Beaumont, 2 years later, married a schoolteacher from Charlottesville, who had never owned an acre of land, and who looked at her the way she had always deserved to be looked at as a person, whole and particular and worth knowing. The family stayed, the valley held, the spring ran cold and clear through every season, feeding the mountain spurge that bloomed every summer in the northwest corner, documented now and named and permanent in the record of the natural world. Clara's second publication came in 1819, her third in 1820. Dr. Reed in Philadelphia called her the most careful botanical eye in the Shenandoah Valley, which she considered both accurate and slightly understated. Her name was Clara Whitmore Hawthorne by then, though she published under Whitmore still, because her father's name was the name the work had started under, and she was not going to change that. And Nathaniel had looked at her when she told him and said, without hesitation, of course, in the tone of a man for whom this had never been in question. They built something in Willow Creek that lasted, not because the county approved, or because the old agreements held, or because the world became what they wished it were. They built it because they showed up, both of them, every morning, to the land and to each other, and to the work of being honest about what they saw and what it needed, and what they were willing to give. The gate stood open. The valley remembered every name that had ever cared for it. And George Whitmore's daughter walked through that gate every morning as though she had always belonged there, because belonging is not something that is given by the people who hold the deed, but something that is earned by the ones who know the land well enough to love it truly. And she had known this land since before she could read, and she had loved it in the way her father taught her, which was completely and without condition, and with the full patient attention of someone who intends to stay. She stayed. That was the whole of it, and it was everything.